Everyone, we'll get started here. My name is Peter Conlon. I'm a resident of Cornwall, and I'm the chair of the Addison Central School District Board of Directors. And I just want to say that with a title like the Community Dialogue to discuss the school board's facility master plan, that we can draw even a handful of people to a meeting with that name is remarkable. We've clearly done better than that tonight, so thank you all very much for turning out. And there's a lot going on tonight in other areas. So, just a few items before we get started into the main presentation. Number one, there's water, cider, and cookies in the back. Please feel free to get up and help yourself. There are bathrooms out these doors and down the halls. If you didn't sign in on the sign-in sheet, which I think is up.
That's right, the yellow sheet's on the table.
Yellow sheet on the table. They're spread throughout. Please do. It's really important that if you want further information, that we can get it to you, and we'd certainly like to know who has been here. Just a minute to talk a little bit about how the evening is going to unfold. I'm going to talk a bit about why we're here, the context and the historical background of our school district, and how we came to talk about facilities master plan. I'm going to turn the mic over to Bob Mason, our consultant. He's going to present some pretty important data and information for everybody to consider. And then we're really going to break up into smaller groups at our tables to have some conversations about people's ideas, people's visions, and we will follow that up by being able to let everybody have a chance to have their voice heard in the form of Post-it notes on some paper over in the back, and you'll see some categories where you'll be putting your ideas and thoughts, as well as just some basic stickers to say where you're coming from on this issue. Just want to say that tonight was really put together by a steering committee of teachers, of staff members, of students, of citizens, and school board members. When we sort of took on this task from the school board level, we just quickly discovered that this was really an awesome and big task. And we decided we needed some help, and we put together this committee. Bob will introduce them later. Members are here to help out at the conversations at the tables. But I just want to give a quick shout out to them, because really what they've done is a lot of work to get us to where we are. So why are we here? This is really the first step in our process of putting together a facilities master plan. We are here so that folks can have a chance to share their vision, their views, their concerns, their optimism, and help us map the future. It's a long process, and again, this is the first step. What I really want to say at the start is that we have made no decisions. I think that sometimes rumors go around and say, oh, well, the school board already knows what they want to do, and now they're just playing lip service to the community. Really, we're not there, and we're not going to get there until we get an opportunity to hear from everybody. This is the third of 3 community dialogues on this, and if last night's was any indication, we're really getting a lot of very valuable and helpful feedback. I say no decisions have been formed, but that's actually not entirely true. One, really, we have arrived at, and that is that our current realities in our school system do not support continuing with just the status quo. Bob will present some data a little bit later that will kind of highlight the challenges that we're facing, and as well as some of the opportunities that we'd like to be able to offer. When we talk about the status quo, we're talking about our current financial realities, but we want to do better in being responsible to our taxpayers, to being able to meet the expectations of our students, and to really continue to strive for our vision of equity and excellence within our school system. So the facilities master plan is really to put together a guiding document that will help not just the current school board, but school boards in the future that will last for, let's say, 10 years. In how do we best utilize our resources, our facilities resources, and of course we're talking about buildings and property and that sort of thing, as we go forward. The history of it was when we, a couple of years ago, started discussing and debating and went to the community to talk about potentially moving 6th graders to this school, to Middlebury Union Middle School. And a lot of the conversation was about what were the repercussions of doing that. when you remove one grade from a small elementary school, what are the repercussions? And we really decided that this is something that had to be done in a greater context of a greater plan. And so we can really look at the consequences and the opportunities that might result from that. So again, it's a longer range look at the district's complex array of facilities, planning long-term, and planning proactively, as opposed to having to react to situations as they come along. That's really one of the real goals here, is so that we can have a document that helps us make decisions as we go forward in the future without having to react to things as they come along. And then we can do it with thoughtfulness and with community input. It's really meant to be a process that brings everybody together. We have a nice crowd tonight. We had the same size crowd last night. It's been very encouraging to have the community interest and the community participation. But one thing we do know and that we do realize is that this is going to be hard. There are going to be some hard choices that we have to make, and some hard decisions that we have to make. And we're not going to reach consensus. We're not going to get 100% buy-in in what we do. We're going to do the best job that we can as a group of 13 volunteer board members to try to achieve all of the goals we have as we come through this facilities master planning process. And we really want everybody to work together to find solutions. So as a board, as we started approaching this, we said, well, what is it we want? What are some questions we want to be asking ourselves all along the way? You'll see a list here. They're not in any particular order, but they address everything from really our continued striving for equity across our school system, being responsible to our taxpayers, to address the challenges that are ahead of us, to think about what our schools mean, not just to our students, but to everybody. And, how should the district respond to continued enrollment decline? That's really one of our big headwinds that we'll get into a little bit later. And the planned outcomes, what we as a board want to see is that obviously we're going to have safe and secure spaces, that we're going to have buildings that meet code and all of that. But we also want to think about our spaces as great spaces for our kids, and great spaces for all of our kids. That kids can have equal access and equity across the district for being able to share the resources, both within our classrooms, outside the classrooms, and then if a kid is from one town or another, that they still have equal opportunity. And of course, throughout this, we're going to think about increased efficiency and effectiveness as we move forward. So I just want to give a little background as to our current school system and what our previous school system was and how we've all sort of come together. So if we think back into olden times in Vermont, we had one-room schoolhouses, and in the 50s and 60s we consolidated those into town elementary schools. That process really continued further along, and we created basically a supervisory union that was sort of a loose confederation of these small elementary schools with a central high school. And we really became a working supervisory union when Middlebury Union High School was built back in the late 50s. Previous to our unification, we were essentially 8 separate boards, one for each elementary school, and then one that oversaw the high school and middle school. And that bred a strong and proud history that was rooted in our towns and our community identity. With, frankly, in my time here, we've had really strong and deep support for our educational programs. A few years ago, we started talking about unifying our district under one form of governance, one board overseeing our 7 town schools and our middle school and high school. And at the time we started talking about it, so did the state. And the state they came up with Act 46, which you all hear about a lot in the news, which was really a series of carrots and sticks to encourage school districts to join together, to unify and create single governed entities. It happened to coincide very nicely as we were headed down that path anyway, and we were able to take advantage of a lot of the carrots in the form of tax breaks and grants to make the process happen. And it's interesting, as we were going through that process, we really thought we were plowing new ground and being innovative. But at one of our meetings when we talked about unifying, a longtime board member, Carol Eccles, came in with an armload of folders and proceeded to put them down. And essentially every decade since the 70s, unification had been studied, and the conclusion was the same in each and every study. That it would benefit our taxpayers, it would benefit our children, that it would be a benefit to everybody. So it only took, well, 40 some odd years to make that happen. But that's where we are today. And I got to say, I have been encouraged as the process went smoothly. For those of you who were around for the vote, it was overwhelmingly in favor of unifying. And I think that really spoke to the fact that people recognize that we really aren't a bunch of separate towns and separate schools, that we really are a school system, especially when you think that all of our kids are together from grade 7 to 12, and we want those 7th graders to arrive similarly educated with all the same opportunities so that they can all continue to progress together. And for us, the process has been smooth, and we've seen a lot of great opportunities by being a unified board that we can operate much more effectively and efficiently, rather than one idea having to go through 8 different boards in order to become a reality. Things have moved along very well. So we became a unified community of 7 towns and 1 school system. We had our first unified budget in fiscal year 18. That was our first time that one budget came up for all of our schools. We came up with new systems to support our unified structure. A lot of that's kind of inside baseball and not terribly exciting, but frankly very important. And we have a single board now that's responsible with oversight of every school in our Addison Central School District, and also responsible for the success of all of our kids, pre-K to 12. So we don't think of kids from one town or another, we think of all of our kids and making sure they all have opportunity. Oh, hey, opportunity, there's the word. So, we talk about who we are and the opportunity to say we are one community together. Our ability to work together to grow and sustain change and impact student achievement and wellness, and that's really what we're all about tonight. And one community with shared resources. And it's interesting that we're holding this event tonight in Middlebury Union Middle School. I remember 20 some odd years ago when this community of 7 towns came together and said, we realize the need for a separate middle school. And it took a lot of work from a lot of people to find land, to purchase the land, to then pass a bond, a $10 million bond to build this building and renovate the high school. And I think the results speak for themselves. We're sitting today in really what is a very highly regarded middle school that I think many of us believe provides an excellent education for our students. And that wasn't just Middlebury doing it, even though it carries the Middlebury name. It was all of us coming together as one to put together this. And with that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Bob Mason, who's been working as a consultant for us, to provide some critical data that you'll all need for our further conversations tonight.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that roll-up. What I'm going to do with you all tonight is share with you some information that will form a context for you to gain some familiarity about your new unified school district. We'll share that information, and then we'll ask you to engage in conversation with each other on that same topic, so we have an idea of where your thinking is relative to the future ahead for the unified district. By way of introductions, I'm Bob Mason. I have recently retired, come out of retirement to assist this new school district in their journey. Prior to retirement, I was a 13-year business manager for Champlain Valley School District, a little bit north of all of you, and I was a 10-year member of the school board and about an 8-year member or chair of that school board. So I have some familiarity with the setting, some familiarity with the topic of educating our children. My wife and I raised our 4 children in Vermont Public Schools, and speaking for both of us, I think we're quite happy with the result. So I'm going to assist in the journey. The first thing I need to do, as Peter mentioned, is I'm going to mention the names of the steering committee and have them stand up, so you know who's going to help you in the process tonight as you move forward. Members of the steering committee are Mary Cullinane, Jennifer Nuceder, Dr. Peter Burrows, Dr. Vicki Wells, Jen Kravitz, Bill Lawson, Erica Gardner, Chris Altomos, Sharon Fletcher, Megan Sutton, Leonard Barrett, Mary Heather Noble, Ron White, and our 2 students, Wyatt Rubright and Sam Warren. If everyone I've mentioned would stand up so people around you have an idea of who's Hi, committee. And thank you all for the work that you put in since since shortly after the formation of the group. Updating you on the timeline, this whole process for this particular facility planning process began back in September of 2017 with the board and committees beginning to talk about what a facilities master plan would look like and what was needed to bring it to fruition. In that process, in June of this last year, we established the ACSD Facilities Master Plan Steering Committee, which I've just referenced and had you meet. They spent a countless number of hours trying to frame a process to effectively bring the community into the conversation at the very beginning of the journey. And that's where we are today with community dialogues. You're attending the third of 3. From that, we'll gather all that information that we get from those dialogues. We'll begin the conversation about how we take data and begin to prepare draft recommendations. We'll likely be back out to you for an event similar to this in the February timeframe to share with you what the initial look of that committee and board conversation looks like. And then in March and June, it's targeted to complete the master plan, have the board approve it, and use it as that guiding document as Peter referenced in an earlier slide. I think it's important that we agree or share what we think is the current context of the setting of this being a unified district. There's some obvious realities that we should touch on. The first is that the new unified district needs to respond to enrollment declines. A couple of the slides you'll see in the data package talk to that enrollment decline. We need to bring equitable access and equitable resources to all the students of the unified district. It would be unfortunate if there's students coming from a community or not who have a disparate exposure to a quality education. We don't need to make it all equal across the unified district, but not to change by changing a zip code. We need to address significant facilities needs. Again, a piece of the data that you're going to see talks to the condition of the buildings that you have spread across the new unified district today. And then lastly, it's my forecast that state and local pressure on property taxes will not diminish in the next 3 or 4 years. It seems to be a focus of conversation at Montpelier. I believe it'll continue. Pressure is building to turn the corner on education cost and turn the corner on property tax burdens that result. So that's our pressures and realities. If you would pick up one of the data packets that's at your table, this is the information that'll form the center of the conversation. I'm going to need one. Thank you. Thank you. This packet will form the basis of the conversation that you have shortly or begin shortly. I do want to touch a minute on what you have in the packet so you have a general handle on what kind of information we're trying to share. The committee that put this together had no small task. They had to gather every bit of information relative to the context of this new unified district and then take that 50 pages and boil down to that portion which was essential for having a conversation about the new unified district. So what you'll see in the packet is in essence what we believe is essential. The first 5 slides or 6 slides you're going to see again in the PowerPoint. So I'd like to move through to what's labeled page 3 so you have an idea what else is in here. Page 3 is a font size 10 presentation of a wealth of information on the enrollment side, by school, talking about enrollment, staffing within the school, and costs within the school. And then we do a little bit of ratioing down below, looking at like costs per student in the building. So that's slide 3. Slide 4 is a staffing perspective. In essence, trying to look at positions in each school, whether they're grant funded, total staff, full-time staff, and then how many people in each building are there on a part-time basis. The next two slides are on student services, array of information about how many students receive services, what type of services they receive, categories of disabilities, and then particulars on cost and staffing within ACSD student services, 2 pages. Do I still have you all with me? I don't expect you to read them all. I just, I do want you to have a handle on what you have in your hands. The next section talks about facilities. The first is a facilities assessment, laying out every bit of key information the committee thought was important to look at relative to buildings, and looking at cost to maintain those buildings relative to condition versus other buildings in the new school district. Just about everything you'd want to know if you were running any of those buildings. Next slide, page 8, is the comparative cost to staff building. Very simple. We took the total cost in each of the buildings, divided by the enrollment with each of those buildings to get an idea of cost per pupil. And then lastly, the maintenance and operations cost in each building. So those are all the slides. I'll give you a few minutes to look at it, and then I'm going to ask for your first reactions to the data. You ready to dig into the details? Okay, so the ones out of all of that we felt were important that you all have a handle on is the enrollment slide first. This is the enrollment trends. The blue is the prior history. The red is a forward-looking forecast. You can see that, in essence, in the past history, the graduating classes of your high school far exceeded in number the quantity of kindergartners coming into the other end of the stream. So over time, you're losing that decline or engaging in that decline each year. That same forecast continues over the next 8 or 10 years as well. Okay, on enrollment?
So
Yes.
Can I ask a quick enrollment question?
You may.
If you look out further than 10 years, I have heard that there could be projected a possible shift in that. Is that part of the discussion at all?
Not particular to this committee. I can tell you that people that do demographic analysis of enrollments usually have a block on the bottom of their sheets that after about 10 years it begins to get less than credible to continue to, because so many variables change by the time you get out there. I do need to emphasize that most of this is basing a forecast on what's been happening historically. If one of your communities decides in 2 years it's the right time to put in a 200 house development somewhere within your circle, this chart doesn't have that in there. And by the same token, if one of your communities decides it's time to do a moratorium on further building until we address the underlying problems with infrastructure, that kind of stuff isn't out there. But other than that, it's good information. Yes?
Census data on children not yet in school?
No, this is largely based on what we have in the school. We didn't go back and do a wealth of research on birth rates or things like that. Okay. Yes?
In the school district that we lived in before, which is Virginia, and it has a lot of money, but they did a yearly census
Yes.
of every kid.
Yes.
Is there any reason we can't at least do a 5-year census or a 2-year census? I know it costs money, I'm not arguing that, but I think it would enable us to have a better picture.
The question was, should we explore engaging in a more detailed analysis of the variables that go behind enrollment to come up with a more credible forecast going forward? You could, as you've mentioned, you could as a district spend any amount of money that you want getting more and more detail on this kind of information. But for purposes of this committee, they didn't have that resource in that time, so this was grabbed from data that's relatively available for your use tonight. Okay, next slide is facilities and maintenance. needs assessed by school. What did I want to say in this chart? Okay, this has rather large totals on maintenance needs by building. If you look into the detailed data, this information came from a 2017 study that the district signed up for with an outside firm coming in and looking at each of the buildings, going to corner and determining how much would be needed to bring each of those buildings up to snuff. So this is, if you wanted every building maintained as industry standards would ask it be maintained, it's a big piece of change by school. It's called the School Dude Facilities Assessment. And if you're really interested in that level of detail, we can share you a copy of that study. Same study. They in essence take the cost to maintain or cost to get buildings up to snuff and produce a facilities cost index, which is a measure of, in essence, how much trouble each school is in based on how well they maintained. Industry standards say that an FCI is 30% or above. That building is at a critical stage and is screaming for action. In essence, FCI, in simple terms, is the cost needed to get the building maintained divided by the cost to replace the building. So the higher it is, the worse it gets. And this is a measure of FCI for schools within your system. Yes?
So I know the purpose of tonight's meeting is to learn about the data. Given that the two biggest schools in our district have the greatest needs, is there plans or at least conversations in place about how that's going to be addressed? That's what this is.
Correct, but before you begin to form an opinion on that, can I show you one more slide?
Yes, please.
Okay. The next takes that same data and divides it by the number of kids in the school. Takes the maintenance cost by pupil and divides it by, so this in essence presents it based with factoring in a bit the size of the building behind it. And this says on a per pupil basis, schools rank that way with cost per pupil. So that's a little different look at the same data and might have you move where we're developing a conclusion.
The pre-K removed where applicable is inclusive of all elementary schools?
It's a good question. The question was, it says pre-K removed. You as a system have some schools that have pre-K and spend money on providing that services and other schools that don't. It was the belief of the committee that it would be best if we pulled out the pre-K data so that we're looking at schools on a comparable basis. Again, pre-K costs removed on this chart. This is 2018-19 budgeted costs by school, pulled from your 2019 budget book. And this is those costs per school divided by the number of kids in each building. Okay? This is a measure of utilization of capacity. How much of the capacity in each building are you taking advantage of with the student enrollment that you have on September of this year? And in essence, it's challenging to do this because you can measure capacity in 30 or so different ways. All this is taking a look at is classroom capacity based on the number of classrooms that are available and the state expectation on the minimum amount of square footage to be provided each school in a classroom. We come up with how many students each building could accommodate, and then we just divide the number of kids that are currently attending by the capacity that building can handle. Yes?
So obviously capacities for each of these schools are very different, but would it be about-ish correct to say somewhere between the district-wide, where it's somewhere between 55 and 60% capacity overall?
By your assessment.
And
I mean, I haven't done the math, but
how many, do we know how many pre-K students there are in the district?
if my memory from this morning is correct, I think it's 58.
15.
Is that, okay. The question was, what's the enrollment in pre-K across all your schools? 58. And the other question was, what's it look like across the full system, the unified district? And you speculated that it would be about 50%.
55 to 60, it looks like to me.
Okay.
Average.
And I'll buy whichever number you want to settle on.
And one last piece of that. Say again what you consider capacity to be.
Capacity, the capacity of each building is the classroom counts, the square footage within those classroom only, divided by the state expectation on the minimum amount of square foot that you need to educate, to provide classroom space to schools. The reason I say that is when you get more serious with this chart and begin to look at doing building renovations, you need to look at capacity in each of your buildings, not just with this one way, but about 10 different ways, because you can run out of capacity with non-instructional space, you can run out of capacity with bathrooms, you can run out of capacity with cafeterias. So you need to do a whole lot more comprehensive look once you move off of this work to something leading to a serious change in the building.
It's not tied to our district's view on ideal class size.
No, it's tied to what the state agency of education indicates you should have.
We know if this looks different if we look at based on our current standards around what an ideal class size is?
Yes, we do, because we've done it both ways. Some of the placeholders move a little bit, but by and large, it's that kind of spread. We've done it both ways, and the committee felt this was more relevant to share with you tonight.
Thank you.
Back in the room.
The question is, are we locked into considering that each town has to have the same type of K through 6 education? Are we considering charter schools under this baccalaureate? Are we finding ways to reach multiple audiences other than our traditional, which hasn't been working too well?
The question was, how broad can your conversation be tonight on this topic? What things should you consider? I would have you open it up. Whatever you think is important based on what you're seeing here at this first blush that should be explored, should be considered, I'd like you to write that down a little later on the agenda so we have that kind of thought. There's no slide in here that says you should consider these things and not consider those, okay? Question over here?
Yeah, I was just wondering, as far as to get a better picture of capacity, which schools have pre-K?
You just stumped the chump here.
Mary Hogan has pre-K, Bridgeport has pre-K, Salisbury, and Riverton.
Okay, the question was, who has pre-K?
Some of them are pre-K and K, though they're not just pre-K.
Just making sure you answered it.
Vicki, could you repeat the answer on who has pre-K?
Yes, so Mary Hogan has 2 pre-K classrooms that are just pre-K grades 3 and 4. Salisbury has a pre-K classroom. Ripton has a pre-K classroom, and Bridgeport has a pre-K classroom for 3 and 4-year-olds.
Okay? Okay. So this is where we stop talking and we hand the work off to you. What we'd like you to do right now is, you've heard the conversation, you've heard the questions. Please take about 5 minutes or 10 minutes to kind of look at the data on your own and begin to think about things that jump out to you that this new unified district should consider. And if you would take Post-it notes and begin to jot your thinking in this first phase as you look at that data with time to reflect. Questions on what you're about to do for 5 or 10 minutes? Yes?
There is more data than you've gone through, right? That they should be looking at also. So, like steering committee members can help answer some of this.
Okay, so the question was, what should you either limit yourself or include in this next segment of the process. I will honestly tell you that the committee is mixed with that. Some thought we needed to get down to 5 slides that you could all really absorb, and then others thought you should have all the information we have available. So purposes of this, look at all the information. The first 5 slides are ones that we felt needed to be in the PowerPoint, or the committee did. The balance of it is what the committee felt was relevant to the debate you're having in your own mind. So look at the entire package, begin to form some thoughts on what you might consider as reasonable next steps. Jot them on a yellow piece of paper or a yellow Post-it note, and you're at it. Yes?
Bob, could I ask a clarifying question about, it sounds like that one of the primary objectives is equity. So does the committee have a definition of equity? How that looks?
The question was, it seems that in previous slides, the reference to equity across the new unified district is important to the board and the committee who has been doing this work. It is, I will honestly tell you, that there's an interesting conversation about equity. Some people believe it means we need to provide equal resource across districts. Kind of you add up all the money and you divvy it up based on number of kids. I think if I could speak for the committee, and this is dangerous, I think the more important line you ought to have when you think of the word equity is that we're now a unified district. You're educating kids pre-K to 12. How they get to your middle school and how they get to your high school should not be dependent on what corner of the town they came from. There should be some level of, there should not be disparate experiences across that spectrum, because they're all your children all together when they enjoy the experience of this school and the high school. So I'm not quite sold on equal, but we have some work to do to get it less than disparate, okay? Okay, it's your time, 10 minutes, enjoy. Thank you. Change gears for a minute. Continue to focus on kind of how we take this data and have it lead to conversations, but we're going to break you up into groups and have to formally talk about some of these things together in groups of 6. But before we do that, we need to tell you what the rules of the road are relative to how you talk with other people in your community. So this is a slide on engagement norms, how we get along and how we have a conversation. It's taken from what the board reviews regularly on how they have a conversation, so we thought it was important that you're aware of those rules. So those are our engagement norms. This is your next task. You're going to have to get up from your tables and shift around, because we want you to sit with people you don't necessarily come from the same community. We want to kind of mix up the communities. So if you would get up and move to a table with people you might not know, introduce yourself to the group, and using your notes, engage in a conversation for the next 30 minutes on what you thought of, what they thought of, and have the benefit of other opinions beginning to improve your view on the challenges. The guiding questions for this particular task are: what is the impact, positive and negative, of some of the proposals you've jotted down, and the corollary is: what are the impact, positive and negative, of not making the changes? Tied to the slide earlier that said we're kind of in that window where we do need to take some sort of a responsive action. Status quo is not quite what's called for. So you're going to get up, you're going to move, you're going to sit down, groups of 6 if you can figure that all out, and engage in the conversation outlined here. Questions on the process? Thank you. Begin. We're going to move on to the next step of the process. Thank you very much for engaging in that great conversation. We've got another process step, but before I move to that, could I remind you all that you need to sign in on one of these sheets of paper before you leave that door tonight, please? The next step of the process. We'd like you to consider your takeaways from the conversation you've had. Jot any notes you need down on Post-it notes because we're going to use them for the next task, which we call a Continuum Walk. The butcher block paper is up on the wall. What we're going to ask you to do is first take one of these dots that you have at your table and put that up on the wall. You see the 4 sentences on the top of the butcher block. It basically says, I'm really concerned with what we're about to do, to I think we have great opportunities with what we're about to do. It's kind of the level of temperature you have. So take one dot, put it up on the board. Everybody satisfied with those instructions? Second thing is do the same thing with your Post-it notes. Take your sticky notes and put them somewhere up on that spectrum where you think they go based on the conversations you've had and your thoughts on whatever that idea is that you have written on the Post-it notes. So when you finish this next phase of work, that board is going to be covered with yellow Post-it notes, and there's going to be a series of dots along the top to gauge your feeling about this process. I'm getting instructions from the perimeter.
Bob promised an excellent closing, but that was really just to draw attention to some extra information. Our website has a lot of the data that you're looking at, in fact more. Also, there is a survey that you can fill out tonight. As you're going out the door, it'll be handed out, but it's also available on the ACSDVT.org website, a survey to provide additional input and your comments from tonight. But what I really want to do is thank everybody. I was at a table over here with lots of folks from different towns, and it was a great conversation with some great thoughtful debate and dialogue. And I know that occurred at every table. I hope that you had the opportunity to put up your thoughts on the board. But most of all, just thank you all for coming out on a cold winter night. And please keep the conversation going. And of course, the school board is happy to hear your comments as well as we go forward. But again, this is step 1 in a long process, and we'll be back in February for further feedback. Thank you.